All right, let's go ahead and kick us off. It looks like most folks are in and on.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy Smith, the facilitator for today's PCEF Grant Committee meeting. We're meeting from 12 to 2 today, a different meeting time. Usually we're in the evenings, but today in the afternoon. Our next, if we could go to the next slide, please. Our virtual meeting participation guidelines are the committee meetings are open to the public. The public will be invited to comment at 12:05, and there's 10 minutes for public comment. There will be a break at 1 o'clock. Online participants will see a break screen, but there won't be any discussion available during that break. In terms of the guidelines for today's meeting, chat box, please introduce yourself. And it's also for noting public comment interest. At all other times, this is host only in terms of PCEF staff. If you're presenting or if you're a committee member, please raise your hand. Again, I just want to reiterate that the public will speak at 12:05 only. The video will be on for committee and presenters only. Please mute your microphone. The meeting is being recorded and we have closed captioning as well. If we'll move over to the agenda for today, at 12:05, public comment. We will not be approving the minutes at this meeting. So probably at 12:15 we'll have program updates. Shortly after program updates, we'll have a Q&A with Deputy City Administrator Donnie Oliveira. 12:40-ish, we'll have city climate project updates and feedback. As I said earlier, 1 o'clock, we'll have a 5-minute break, real short, but 1 o'clock. Then at 1:10, we'll come back for, again, the continuation of the city climate projects. 2 o'clock, we will have a meeting close. So at this point, I would like to start with introductions of committee members. Robin, you're first on my screen.
Good afternoon. Robin Wang, PCEF Committee member, he, him.
Meg?
Hey, you all, Megan Horst, she, her, committee member and co-chair.
And I'm just looking at participants to make sure Ranfis, if you could please go. All right, well, Ranfis online. We can come back to him later. Sam, how about I start with you and you introduce PCEF staff? Oh, wait. Oh, Sam, hold on. Hi, Ranfis. We're just doing intros.
Hey, sorry, my apologies. Just coming in late from prior call. Hi, everyone. Ranfis, Genitinho Viatoro, he, him pronouns, committee member.
Welcome. And Sam, turning it over to you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and introduce, and maybe I'll just use this as an opportunity to introduce a few new folks that folks have seen here. Folks have met in small groups, but I'll use this as an opportunity because I was going to do it in the program updates, but I'll go ahead and speak to that. So first, Sam Brasso, he, him pronouns, program manager of the PCEF team. I'll before I get to James, I just wanted to, and Rachel, I want to start with some of the new folks you all have met in the last meeting, starting with Kenny Asher. So Kenny, maybe go ahead.
What?
Thanks, Sam. Just Kenny Asher, Deputy Program Manager, he, him pronouns. Nice to be here.
Cool. Thank you, Kenny. And then I want to turn it over to Jess Pine, who recently started it towards the end of September. Jess, go ahead as our Data Systems and Performance Manager. Jess, go ahead.
Jess Pine, he, him, his. And yes, I'm the new Data Systems and Performance Manager.
Well, I'll come back around. And then Johnny Day, go for it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Johnny Day. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Strategic Partnerships Project Manager. Happy to be here.
Great. And then our newest member starting with us last week, who you all will get to see a lot more of as we move forward, Rafael Timurishi. as our external affairs manager.
Rafael Tamaki, he, him pronouns, external affairs manager for PCEF. Happy to be here.
Okay, and then Eric, because I don't know that you've introduced yourself a few times, maybe for some of the new members, go for it.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Eric Engstrom, Interim Director at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. He, him pronouns.
Great. And then Madison, who also started just a few weeks back.
Hey, Madison Mashker, they, she pronouns, communication strategist.
Great. Okay, and then let's turn it over to James and Rachel.
All right, and you all are more used to seeing me, so good to see you again. James Valdez, he, him pronouns, strategic partnerships and policy management.
Hi, everyone. Rachel Gilmore, she, her, PCEF staff.
Back to you, Tracy.
All right, Sam, you're getting a full team.
We are.
All right, now we will proceed with public comment. I just want to remind you, if you're interested in providing public comment, please raise your hand or indicate your interest through the Zoom chat function. For those joining the meeting by phone, please enter *9 to indicate your interest in providing public comment. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, I'll come on and I will say thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. So again, now's the time for public comment. Either indicate your interest in the chat or raise your hand. All right, and Sam, I'm not seeing anyone chat. There's quite a few people, but I don't see anyone in chat even. Can someone double check me?
I think that's correct.
All right. All right, well, there's no public comment, so we will move on to program updates.
Okay, mainly, we've got a lot of new staff coming on board, but a few updates before I turn it back. I would like to just give a moment for Jess and Raphael to share more with you, as you all will see a lot more of them in the months to come for different capacities. But largely, the big things I wanted to share is, as you all know, we've been busy underway with our community grants, our 2023 community grants, and onboarding those grantees. So that work is well underway. And so a big moment, though, a marquee moment in that cycle was a little celebratory event that we held in the middle earlier this month on I believe the 16th of the month, where we brought all our grantees together with our many grantees and a few past grantees just to connect and have a little bit more of an informal setting, where the folks that were recently awarded funds got to connect with project managers, celebrate a little bit, and got to talk about some of the things and build relationships with each other. So it was a good event, and it's just a moment that, as we continue to grow our team, opportunities like that we're hoping and that we can be hosting more of. In addition to that, Strategic Program 3 from the Climate Investment Plan, which was focused on clean energy and single-family homes, released its RFP over the course of late August or late September through October, and that closed up, and now we're moving into the review phase on that RFP. And so we're excited to move that program along, as that was our largest program out of the Climate Investment Plan at 140 million. So the staff are busy moving forward with that RFP. Next, just yesterday, we released our RFP for our e-bike access program. That was Strategic Program 6 in the Climate Investment Plan. And so that's going to be out here for several weeks, and we're excited for that to be out on the streets. And we've had some good network and engagement sessions prior to the release of that RFP. In addition to that, you all obviously today will hear about all of the city climate projects and get a brief status update. But I wanted to just note a few of those things, as all of that has been happening as we've staffed up. Now we're at about 32 FTE on the team, and we will be hiring ideally about another 10, 11 folks here over the coming 3 to 4 months as well. So we're continuing on this, but just wanted to point to and give a moment here for Raphael and Jess both to share more, in part because you're going to expect to see a lot more of them. Raphael more working closely with you all, but Jess coming to all as part of bringing together our data and evaluation work as we start to report on that as we hone that in. So I want to just give the floor a little bit for Raphael first to share a little bit more, and then for Jess to share a little bit more on their backgrounds.
All right. Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. As I said, I'm the External Affairs Manager for PCEF. I'm coming from Multnomah County. I spent the last 10 years as a senior policy advisor to the last 3 chairs and strategic initiatives manager. I've worked largely in workforce and human services, but I've also, particularly during the pandemic, worked in public safety, upstream public health. I'm very much excited for this transformative opportunity, and I hope to get to know you. I've done a lot of work at the community level. I may know some of you through some of that engagement work. And again, I think I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, Raphael. And I want to turn over to Jess to share a little bit because Jess is coming from us from within the city. And so I wanted you all to just understand a little bit what Jess brings. Jess.
Hey, everybody. So I, as Sam said, I actually am coming from within the city. I previous to this, some of you may know me actually as the city's goods and services procurement manager. I was in that role for a little short of 3 years. And before that, I've actually been working for the city for about 8 years now in various capacities. And I actually worked with the Bureau of Environmental Services as a contract analyst over there. Prior to that, I actually, most of my work history has actually been in human services. And so I worked for the state and Medicaid provider enrollment and reporting and data management. And then prior to that, I worked in a number of nonprofits doing data management, doing fiscal reporting. And so I am really looking forward to bringing a lot of that and being able to tell the PCEF story through reporting.
Great. Thank you. So you all have gotten to see a lot of us, but now we're shoring up and building that backbone for a lot of that work. And so a lot of that is certainly involved going back through refining our systems, a lot of new perspectives coming in and sharing where we can do our work better. And so needless to say, we're quite in that storming phase of building out our leadership team and restructuring that team. And so you'll continue to see us, and I invite you all in the different opportunities to connect with us so you can get to know these folks here. But thank you, Jess and Raphael. And it's not to say you all will not be connecting with other folks like Johnny Madison, but I want to make sure you all got a sense for them first. Okay. With that, I think I will go ahead and I'm going to check and see. I think that's my primary updates, but I want to see if there are any questions first, and then look around and see if Donnie has joined us. James, next slide.
Sam, Donnie is online. He has joined the meeting.
Beautiful. All right, well, I think this next part was just, I know that as part of the city transition, generally there's a whole host of things that have been changing, including where a range of different authorities exist. And I know some questions have come up from committee members. So I wanted to really give the floor to Deputy City Administrator Oliveira to be able to just share a little bit about that transition and give you all an opportunity to ask questions around the state of play today, and then what things will look like as we move into the next calendar year. So Donnie, it's your floor.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who haven't met, my name is Donnie Oliveira. I use he, him pronouns. I actually have a deck, Sam, and it's just sort of our stock deck. And I wonder if it'd be useful just to run through that briefly and then answer questions, because it kind of outlines what's happening in the transition. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, Rachel, I think if you can give Donnie the sharing privileges.
All right, thank you.
You should be able to share now, Donnie. All
right. This is real quick, so I won't take too much time, but I think it's sometimes helpful to see the visuals. And you may have seen this. This has been making the rounds. All right. All right, see my screen? Yes. All right. So, so just real quick. So as part of this transition, to the new form of government on January 1, we've been outlining city staff been hard at work, a transition team, sort of putting together the backbone of what that's going to look like. But just as a refresher, in the new form of government, we essentially now have a legislative branch and an executive branch. And so the council makes up the legislative, and it does traditional city council things like meet with community, set direction for the city through policy and strategic planning. It'll adopt our city budget, which is probably its most significant authority, and it'll develop and approve policies through the traditional like legislative model. And while simultaneously the mayor oversees the administrative section of the city, and that's really just implementing the policy direction of council. It will partner with council on strategic planning and initiatives. It'll work with council on developing the budget that gets approved by council, but ultimately, and it'll help ensure that we have the resources to implement those directives that council sets forward. I'll talk about it in a second, but policies will be able to be generated from both branches of the government through the bureaus, like traditionally, or council can enact policies. It'll be a little bit more process oriented when council does it, and I'll talk about that in a second. But really, we're looking at an opportunity for our communities to activate policies through two distinct branches, which is pretty common for this form of government.
Donnie, excuse me, the slides are in presenter mode. If you want to change that to.
Oh, thank you. I don't, it doesn't matter to me, but.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no notes. I'm not, yeah.
Okay.
Let me see if I can stop sharing real quick. I don't know why I did that. Well, I'm just gonna go. It doesn't matter. I'm okay. As long as you don't care, I'm okay. So this is how policies in the policy ecosystem will look like in theory. And I'm saying in theory because city council will have a large investment and influence on how they do business. But the way it's going to be set up in theory is that city council will create committees that will largely do most of the legislative work. So you think there might be a housing committee, a public safety committee, a police committee. There might be a land use committee. There might be a transportation committee. Those are really going to be determined by council. And those committees will largely be the place where bureaus bring policies for vetting. It'll be where policies are generated by council. It's the place that we're going to do most of our policy work. So the large body of 12 will probably not see a whole lot of really deep deliberations on all the things for the big items, of course. And so these council committees are going to be really where most of the action happens. Simultaneously, through the city administrator's office, when bureaus are developing policies, it'll go up through the city administrator and then working with the mayor's office to put things on the council agenda with the president of the council. So you'll have this process where council committees are working with bureaus, and then you'll also have the process where when bureaus are generating ideas, they're going through the president of the council. And these are just another way to look at sort of the responsibilities of both branches. So city council will, activate a lot of things for us, and the executive side will implement those things. One thing that'll start happening, and you may start seeing some of this when it comes to PCEF grants, is a lot of the authorities related to grants and procurement to a threshold of approximately 5 million won't have to go to council anymore. So they'll streamline our processes, which I think will be for the smaller projects really helpful. There'll still be, RFPs, and there'll still be all the due diligence of the work, but not everything will have to go through council. And you'll probably also see a lot more things going through consent on council that, if they make it through the committees, like a 3-0 vote perhaps, might just go directly to consent for the full body for adoption. So in one way, it'll streamline our policy development. And then just another way to look at our structure. So our communities, our voters elect a council and a mayor. The mayor and council pick a city administrator who then appoints deputies that run the administration of the organization. And just as a reminder, this is what it looks like. So there's city administrator that has 6 DCAs, one for budget and finance, one for city operations, community and economic development, public safety, vibrant communities, which is largely parks and our arts and culture groups, and then Public Works. So those 6 service areas represent the structure of the administrative side of the government, and the DCAs oversee those bureaus that are listed there. For our part, for my part, it's BPS, Housing, Permitting Development, Prosper Portland, and the spectator venues, which is MODA, Providence Park, Keller, etc. And really just wanted to give that overview just for refresher for those of you who've been tracking. But so this is the new form of government. And what I'll add for flavor now is, as we are approaching January 1, the things that are happening, I actually had a work session today about code updates. So there's been a transition team that's going through the entire, all 34 chapters or titles of our code to change things like getting rid of the term commissioner in charge, and to move some delegated authorities to a city administrator to really set us up with this new structure. That's going to be distinct from our legislative, which is unique for Portland. And the second thing that's happened, I think this is material to PCEF right now, is there is an evaluation of all the structures of commissions and committees within the city. So there's just an inventory happening, what jurisdiction, what authority committees and commissions have. Some report directly to directors, some have legislative authority, some have no authority. And so they're just a scan of what exists so that the next council and the next mayor can determine how those committees and commissions are going to be managed. On paper right now, all committees and commissions are managed in the administrative side, and there's a few like PCEF that can make recommendations to council by code. But largely the rest will be traditionally going through the mayor's legislative responsibilities. So that's in a nutshell what's happening. It's really tricky to try to design something that 13 people can change in January. So we've been trying to get certain elements that are legally required done by January 1, and then other elements, we'll say we're getting it to 75% or 80% complete, because we know that the newly elected folks will want to have some influence on some of the decisions. And then there's things that are 100% council's responsibility, like they'll elect their first president, and there's their vice president. They'll create their own committees, and then the president will assign those committees, and they'll want to introduce their new concepts to the budget. So there's a lot that they have absolute authority over, and we're just trying to set up the processes for them to run them once they are set come January. And then for the administrative side, I would say largely the structure of the executive side is pretty set. The deputy city administrator model is up and running. We've been rehearsing since July. So I feel pretty, as a DCA, I feel pretty confident that we have what's, largely a functioning group right now, and a lot to work out in terms of code. But I think we'll be ready to support the new mayor and the new council come January. And I'm going to stop, and I'm assuming there's some questions. And I think
Donnie, before we move to questions, I would like to introduce 2 committee members who just joined before we proceed with questions, please. So Faith, if you could start, and then Tracy, introduce yourselves, please.
Hi there. Sorry I was late. Faith Graham, committee member, she, her pronouns. Happy to be here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Tracy Scott. Happy to be here as well.
Welcome. And now if the committee members have questions for Donnie, this is the time, or comments. Meg.
Yeah, hi, Donnie. Thanks for coming to this and for that overview. That's really helpful with all these moving parts. You mentioned on the implications for PCEF, but I would just love for you to walk us through those in more detail. Like in the past, historically, we've worked under Commissioner Rubio recently as the commissioner in chief, I think that's the right words, of BPS, and now we won't be directly, there won't be. So will we be coordinating with a committee? That sounds like these committees are where the real power is at, like legislative making power. So that's kind of one question, is that. I have 2 other ones. You mentioned all of them, but I'm just asking for more detail. The second one is, it sounds like when we make recommendations, mainly the ones that City Council will be voting on related to PCEF will be funding decisions that are over 4 million, I think you said, or over 5 million, and anything under might come in on a consent agenda, but pre-approved by committees, it sounded like. So just to elaborate, the implications particularly for us. And then the third one was, oh shoot, I didn't write that down. What was my third question? Well, maybe it'll come to me or somebody else will ask a great question.
So, so in the new form of government, I mean, technically it started right now. So PCEF is in BPS, which reports to a deputy city administrator, which reports to a city administrator, which reports to the mayor. So your thread to an elected is to the mayor at this point, right? So the committees are a part of the administrative side of the government, not the legislative. If the new mayor, the mayor-elect, has keen interest on PCEF, it'd be their prerogative to engage, but otherwise it would just delegate through down from the powers, but like on paper, to be really bureaucratic, would be the mayor delegates to the city administrator, to the DCA, to the director, to Sam. How policies or how like a funding recommendation would go to council is still going to be, it's not fully set in stone. Megan, just to be candid, like I think we know on paper that PCEF makes funding recommendations to council, and we just recently created a code that said council can't tinker with the PCEF code without the committee seeing it first and making a recommendation on it, right? So we know in our code, it already clearly shows a line from PCEF, the PCEF committee, to council. Whether that goes to a committee or directly to the council, it still needs to be worked out by council. Council will have to have some influence on how they want to do that. And that's not just unique to PCEF, that also applies to Landmarks Commission, Planning Commission, the Parks Board. There's a few boards in our system that have direct recommendations authority to council. Now, there may be other codes that say the PCEF committee wants to make that aren't necessarily funding related, that or don't get generated by council, that would go through the mayor's office. So it's a little convoluted right now, but that'll all get cleaned up. There's actually a team called the Council Operations Team. It's led by Lori Brocker, who's hiring people right now like crazy to build that apparatus. Oh, I actually used to have a slide on that. That's going to be the team that helps move policies between council and the administrative side, and then from administrative side to council. But those are good questions, and they still need to be flushed. And they're very much like not complete because we don't have that council in place. But good questions. And then as far as the threshold, last thing on the thresholds, because you asked about that, is we're tinkering, and I'm saying tinkering, we're waiting for legal guidance on what authorities the city administrator has. So, you know, there's a draft that shows that up to 5 million, Mike Jordan, who's our existing city administrator, can sign off on IGAs, again, RFP process, but like once, instead of going to council to approve, Mike can sign off on, same thing with grants after process, Mike can sign, doesn't have to go to council. Is that number going to move? Perhaps. And then can Mike delegate that down to a DCA? That's likely.
Yeah, it seems like that impacts a lot of process for us. And then the last one, you flagged that there's a review of all the various recommending and advisory boards and councils. It sounds like there's nothing that's not complete yet, but I guess just in addition to keeping us in the loop generally, that one seems like an important one to be kept in the loop on.
I will share this. There was a council meeting about a month ago where the Housing Bureau was looking at reducing a few committees to one. And during that council meeting, a couple of commissioners were very keen on the question of should council have any oversight of committees. And so I would, just offer that question has been called. What's happening right now, though, from a staff level is purely just a inventory and analysis. Like we just need to understand what we've got before we start making determinations. But I think it's safe to say that the mayor-elect will have an outsized influence on how committees and commissions in their portfolio, which is all of them, function.
Robin.
Yeah, thanks. I got a couple questions, more like examples to help me understand.
Yeah.
So one example is, let's say we were, going to propose a new climate investment plan. How would that be funneled through the various organizations? And then the second question is, what if there is going to be some party, whether it's the newly elected mayor, newly elected council, or even the PCEF committee? What if we wanted to introduce a material change to PCEF? How would that kind of navigate through the process based upon where it originated from?
Great question. So those are pretty reasonable examples, Robin. So first, thanks for the question. To your first question, when you update the CIP, we'll do that through the administrator, through the mayor's office, because it's an existing plan. And we would just say, this is the mayor recommended to council. So that one's pretty straightforward. Because you're already, I'm assuming that we're talking about the existing CIP and we're updating it, so it's an amendment. We would just run that through the legislature.
Or, yeah, I mean, it could be an amendment, but it could be a new one, right? And,
Sure.
you know, it's only good for 5 years. So at some point we would be putting together a new CIP.
Yeah, I still think in that case, it would still run through the administrative side. And then to your second question, though, any change that you all would want to make, it would be an administrative function. Now, if it came outside of the administrative side, let's say from council, they would have to send it to you first before they took action. So, or if it generated from you, we should bring the org chart back up, like you're, as a part of the administrative side, we're generating things, so it would go up from the PCEF committee through the city administrator to the mayor to council. If council started, that would go right to you guys, right? It'd be like, council wants to do something before they can do it. PCEF committee has to hear it first because it's in code. And that's unique. I mean, planning commission technically has something similar, but it's not that straightforward. So in any case, code changes to PCEF can't happen without the committee hearing them first, whether you originate them or whether they come out of council and go to you first. Does that make sense?
Ramfis.
Hey, thanks again, Donnie, for presentation. Remind me again how committees are formed. It's mayor appoints, council approves. Is that how it works again, or?
Well, today, Ramfis, that's how it's, as we sit here today, that's how it works. I was alluding to it. There's a question that was called by council that city attorneys are looking at for the future, which is there a scenario where council doesn't confirm and the mayor can directly appoint? I don't know, Eric or team, you can remember what day it was. There's a very public conversation about this, about the appropriateness of the administrative and executive side appointing their own committees without public confirmation. So I would say that's up in the air. However, with a couple of caveats, one is in PCEF's scenario, your appointment strategy or structure is in code. And so that's very clear how that you all make recommendations to the mayor that then ultimately makes recommendations to council. And there's a few other committees that are like that. But broadly speaking, I think there's a lot of interpretation that's going to happen after January about future committee appointments.
Thanks, that's helpful. And then in terms of how these committees would be structured, I'm assuming, is the assumption correct that it would be one committee for each deputy city administrator? So there would be probably one that would just oversee community and economic development. Is that the right assumption?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ramfis, were you talking about the council committees? I'm sorry. Is that what you referred to? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, no. So the council committees are going to be decided how many and what they're about by council. So they're not going to be by service area. Like I've seen mock-ups of this in the GTAC, so the Government Transition Advisory Committee. They made, I think, 6 or 7 recommendations, and they were not service area specific. In fact, there was one version I saw that 2 were in the service area that I support. So it's not by service area, and they're appointed, once they're created by council, they'll be appointed by the president of the board. So the president of the board has a lot of influence on things, and those will in theory be set for a year, and they'll be able to generate initiatives, and they'll be able to, in all the appropriately, themed policies will go to them first. So those committees will be made up by council, designed by council, and the number will, we're recommending, I think, 5 or 6 from a capacity issue, but I mean, it's their prerogative. They could create 12. And as far as the makeup of those Ramfis, we're recommending, 3. So they have, it's odd for voting. But I mean, they could be 5 as long as they're just below, full quorum. And we wouldn't recommend that, but that's by best practice. But that's really their prerogative.
And in this scenario, there could be a committee that would oversee or could provide policy recommendations from the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Just want to sort of understand that.
Perhaps, but again, they would have to go to you first anytime they'd want to tinker. I don't think there'll be that program specific grant. I mean, there may be a committee that's like, there might be a climate committee. Let's say the 12 that are elected really, they see the future. They don't have their head in the sand, and they say, yeah, we want a climate committee. So then I think inherently PCEF would come up for them. But it wouldn't be like they wouldn't create like a PCEF committee. That would be pretty project specific. We wouldn't recommend it anyway.
No, thank you.
Are there additional questions or comments for Donnie? All right, Donnie, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Good to see faces.
All right, we will continue the agenda and we will proceed now to the 2024 city climate projects, and James will be providing an update on the projects. Please hold your questions until the end of his presentation, and that involves, he'll give a presentation, we'll take a break at 1, and so your questions will be after the break.
And actually, I'm going to pass it to Sam first.
Oh,
so,
Sam, okay.
You go first and then hand it off.
All right, Sam.
Okay, I'll kick us off here. Just next slide. Okay, so just as a reminder, shortly after the code changes in October 2022, we got underway with a 9-month process to develop the climate investment plan. As we developed the climate investment plan, we had been working on a basis of a set of projections that ultimately formed the $750 million climate investment plan that resulted in 16 strategic programs, et cetera. Now, shortly after we passed the climate investment plan, surprise, surprise, we ended up getting a pretty substantial update on our fund forecast. And so that set underway the development of the 2024 city climate projects. And that was adopted by the committee. And we'll talk about that here, but that was recommended by the committee in February 2024. And since that time, we've really been working on incorporating that into the 2024 budget. We've been working on collaborating for climate action funding opportunity, our 2023 community grant cycle, as well as the CIP implementation, some of which we named. And now we're headed towards heading back towards City Council in December, early December of this year, to formally amend the climate investment plan so it captures all of the programming that we're going to discuss with you all here today, that you all have heard about in the past, that will provide that update here. And as a reminder, the objective here in response to our earlier audit in 2022 and so forth is largely to have a singular place where we're able to capture the entirety and the scope of PCEF's investment. So collectively for council, for the public, for others, there's a clear understanding of what we're investing in, what our outcomes, our goals, and that it is transparent, and that guiding document ultimately lives within the climate investment plan. So that amendment is key so that we can ultimately right-size this. And so that's largely here. Just wanted to kind of give the arc before I really, in a minute here, turn it over to James to walk us through sort of where we've gone to and more of the specifics around the programming that we're engaged in with our city partners and bureaus. But again, the next slide really is important to share what we responded to. Again, we spent a substantial amount of time in a condensed time, but a substantial amount of time through 2023 developing that climate investment plan, only to come on to the other side of it and come to the fortunate realization that we had a lot more funding that we were able to work with. That gave us the opportunity in recognizing there was going to be a substantial lift that we are currently underway on and implementing. There's going to be a substantial lift for the existing climate investment plan. It gave us an opportunity to look internal to the city. And so if we go to the next slide here. And so what we did in recognizing that we had an additional $540 million on top of the $750 million in that climate investment plan is we started with our climate emergency work plan. Again, as part of the CIP process, we wanted to crosswalk all of our work with the emergency work plan. This time, we really started centrally with the climate emergency work plan. The bureaus within the emergency work plan submitted projects. Staff shortlisted projects based on just basic eligibility prioritization criteria that you see to the left here, or to the right here. The city budget office by saying CBO reviewed those projects to understand the budget alignment, where those opportunities helped offset general fund. And then you all ultimately discussed those in a short series of meetings and made a recommendation in February of 2024. And as a reminder, the criteria we focused on here was just at a top level that any project we're considering has meaningful emissions reductions or sequestration opportunities, as well as demonstrable community benefits. And those are going to look different. Oftentimes, those are a lot of the subjects from some of our discussions. But then there's other prioritization criteria that we use to elevate certain projects, whether they're general fund offsetting, to what extent they're shovel ready, implementation ready, et cetera. And so let's go to the next slide. And so in sum, what the package reflects currently, and this is updated from what you all had recommended here, based on the budget process we went through in FY 24-25, but it reflects about 386 million over the course of 5 years. So it isn't a singular year, but over the course of 5 years, working its way through a range of city bureaus. And so that's really the top level figure. What we hadn't done up until more recently is really aggregate that, and we aggregate that across those different bureaus. Vast majority of that funding is going towards green infrastructure within the city. So as James will tee up, a lot of that is occurring through the Bureau of Environmental Services and Portland Parks and Recreation. Second sort of largest tranche of funding is heading towards the funding area, transportation, decarbonization. And then we've got funding set aside for clean energy and a smaller set for other climate projects and workforce development. So with that, I'm going to turn it to James to really walk us through at a high level the each of the different bureaus and the projects within there. You all have received the longer form document with all the content that speaks to the outcomes and goals, but we wanted to give a really high level overview and come back towards the end to check in on your feedback and questions. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to James at this point.
All right. Thank you, Sam. And yeah, as Sam mentioned, really the work that we've been doing over the past few months is working with the bureaus that have been allocated funding and refining the goals, the outcomes, the metrics, and the workforce development related elements associated with each one of the funding allocations. And so what you have that you received ahead of time a couple of weeks ago is that approximately 60-page document that breaks out all of those for each individual strategic program that is being incorporated into the Climate Investment Plan amendment. And so this is just, the brief list of the 19 different strategic programs. And I just want to note one thing kind of at the beginning here, which is that when you all in February came together and approved this list, it was actually a slightly longer list of 24 individual strategic programs. And I'll talk about some of the combination of those over the last few months, just in terms of efficiency in administering them and kind of the effective synergies between some programs that we brought into a single program. But now there are 19 that are part of the Climate Investment Plan amendment. And I'm going to go through and just give a brief snapshot or the high level overview by bureau of the different allocations, and happy to dive further in if people have questions, but we'll go ahead and hold them till the end. So Portland Water Bureau, which is responsible for providing drinking water to all of us Portlanders, is allocated 3 different strategic programs. The first one is focused on home water leak repair for low-income homeowners who may be facing both very high utility bills from the leakage associated with water, as well as potentially damage to their homes as well from water intrusion. And this is a really important program that helps low-income households be able to repair the systems that have failed, or the pipes that have failed, as well as to offset their cost of water while that leak was occurring. And so there's a $2.5 million allocation for this. This is delivered through community-based organizations that do the work and engagement, and then coordinating the work with homeowners. The second strategic program is really focused on the energy efficiency improvements for Portland Water Bureau facilities. And the approach here is that they're going to be going out to RFP pretty soon with an energy performance contracting approach where they'll evaluate the different facilities that they have under management and identify those core opportunities for both energy efficiency, HVAC improvements on a building by building level, as well as doing some of the renewable energy generation scoping for solar and, where it makes sense, battery storage associated with increasing the amount of renewable generation that is kind of under management by Portland Water Bureau, either on buildings or out in big open areas. You see here the lower picture is the Columbia Wellfield site, which already has a solar array on it, but there could be additional sites and facilities like that. In addition to this, there's a facilities renewable energy generation allocation that's focused on both that solar piece as well as a new micro hydro turbine and the redevelopment and major project up there at Washington Park, as well as some efficiency improvements that'll help the Vernon micro hydro facility generate more power over the years to come. And so all these programs really help deliver a more efficient water system collectively, while reducing costs in some cases, like in the water leak repair program for individuals, and in other cases for the city as a whole in both generating renewable energy and saving energy. Also connected to Portland Water Bureau is a kind of element of the city that isn't known or talked about too much, called the Bureau of Hydroelectric Power, which operates and manages the hydroelectric facility at the Bull Run watershed. And there are two powerhouse facilities up there in the Bull Run. And there's two major pieces of funding that we are allocating to Portland Water Bureau or Hydroelectric Power Bureau. The first is making some upgrades to the powerhouse controls and systems that manage that power generation to make them more efficient and to really keep that system operating because it's very old equipment and critical failures can lead to very costly repairs if they're not addressed ahead of time. Also, there's a long process and it'll take about 5 years for renewing the license for the powerhouses and the generation facilities. The primary purpose of the dams and the facilities in the Bull Run watershed are not for power generation. They were initially built for the containment of water and for provision of drinking water. And then electric generation was added later in the 1970s. And so the permit for operating the power generation side is up for renewal, and through a public process with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, we'll be relicensing that facility through consultation with tribal nations and public input, and really allowing the city to continue managing that electric generation into the future. And there's also, I'll just note, a habitat conservation plan associated with the streams and the watershed that is connected to the Bull Run that is part of continued implementation of that generation. So in Bureau of Environmental Services, as Sam said, one of the major allocations in green infrastructure at around $70.5 million over 5 years is in a whole package of different programs and opportunities that Bureau of Environmental Services manages throughout the city. And so this includes both increased planting and restoration of natural areas that are managed for stormwater purposes throughout the city, as well as some flood mitigation and watershed management, especially around places like Johnson Creek, as well as managing the stormwater infrastructure that's kind of within our streets and cities, cleaning out the bioswales, making sure that those green infrastructure elements are operating properly and that they're delivering the benefits that were intended when they were planted. And then there's a function of biological science and the kind of ecosystem management and the teams that manage and monitor the urban green infrastructure throughout the city. And so you see that this funding area is both about planting and maintaining trees and shrubs, but also about public education and maintenance of our infrastructure. Strategic Program 23 is an allocation that is within the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, really our colleagues on the climate team that are responsible for a lot of the engagement with state and even federal policy and helping to move the ball forward on building decarbonization, transportation decarbonization, as well as really tracking and monitoring our progress towards meeting climate goals. Things like doing the carbon inventory for the city and Multnomah County, adopting and continuing to work on the renewable fuel standard targets and ensuring compliance with those for all the fuel providers in Portland, developing a citywide energy strategy so that there's coordination in this new form of government Donnie mentioned between the different functional areas, and that we have better both visibility and path forward for energy efficiency and renewable generation in the city. And then also, as we're looking at the climate emergency work plan as one of our guiding documents, both completing the progress report on that, as well as the next chapter of what our climate plans might look like as a city. And I'm getting close to one, but I'll get through a few more before we take a break. We also have a $40 million allocation for Portland Housing Bureau, focused on both the preservation, maintenance, and energy efficiency of primarily multifamily housing, and looking to both make improvements that maintain or preserve the affordability of the housing, as well as make those housing units or apartments more energy efficient and affordable, which reduces costs for the people living there. We anticipate around 800 units or apartments of affordable multifamily housing to be improved through this allocation. But also this will lead to the extension or continued operation of those properties as affordable housing, with covenants or restrictions on rent increases, and targets for the percentage of area median income that they target for different units. Also in this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in some changes that were made through the budget process, there's a small allocation for doing critical home repairs for people in low-income homes who are homeowners, recognizing that there's often a lot of deferred maintenance and needs that are connected to both safety as well as the energy performance, or keeping water out of homes, being able to address really core needs of home repair that help people be able to stay in their homes and make them more comfortable over time. There's a significant allocation, about $29 million, to Bureau of Fleet and Facilities. And this is our bureau, or kind of internal services within the city, that manages pretty much all the fleet vehicles that are driving around the city of Portland, helping different bureaus and organizations meet people's needs. And this includes both on the street repair, as well as things even like permitting and people who drive around to do inspections, parks department trucks and cars that do maintenance. And really, Bureau of Fleet and Facilities has a plan for electrifying eventually all the vehicles, and getting to zero emissions vehicles. This strategic program allocation is intended to pay for the marginal cost of about 700 or more city-owned vehicles, and getting those to electric over the next 5 years. And then also in being able to do the installation of charging infrastructure throughout different city facilities to serve the needs of those vehicles. This is through a contract that exists already with the city, with a firm called OpConnect, which is a local firm here. But there's also a lot of infrastructure needed in addition to the chargers of what's known as make-ready infrastructure, the electric lines that need to be buried and then brought to that location where the chargers will be installed. Also included in this, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is the transition to a new facility for all the maintenance of fleet vehicles within the city, out on Swan Island, and the training of technicians in the switchover from diesel and gas vehicles to working on electric vehicles and the chargers associated, and really kind of a reskilling or upskilling of the staff that work within city fleet. There's a $1 million allocation in this related to the Office of Arts and Culture, in the replacement of a really single piece of equipment that failed over this past year, which was the cooling tower and HVAC system for Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. This work has already happened. You see on the right, there's a picture of a crane there. And that was lifting this very large, almost like a small room size piece of equipment that was upgraded, as well as some roofing upgrades that were done to have greater insulation in that facility, which will save energy over time. And the modeled assumptions are that the energy use associated with cooling will be reduced approximately in half for this venue that is owned by the city of Portland, but managed in conjunction with Metro and the Portland 5 consortium. I think I'll stop for a moment if we want to still take a break, or I could continue. Maybe I'll leave it to you, Sam. Should we take a 5-minute break?
I'm gonna look to the group and just look for nods, but I'm gonna encourage that we take the 5-minute break since I know this is a lengthier slide here.
All right, Sam, I see at least Faith's thumb up. We'll take a 5-minute break and come back at 1:05.
All
James?
right, folks, we're coming back.
All right, just begin when you're ready.
All right. All right, hope you all had a good 5-minute break here. And figured it'd be good to take a break because this next one is a multi-part allocation to Portland Bureau of Transportation. And we're really excited to be getting to work with PBOT in a variety of these different programs. And some of these are really already underway, and it's been great to see that progress. And so I'll briefly talk about each one. You see there also that there's a little bit of the content on the side. And again, much more detail in the Climate Investment Plan Amendment document that you all saw. The first is a $30 million allocation to the Portland Streetcar Project through PBOT. And this is really to pay for the acquisition of 12 new streetcars and to pay for a portion of that full acquisition. These streetcars that we have now are reaching the end of their life, and being able to replace the equipment really helps to both maintain the existing functionality of the streetcar system, which is a great low carbon or zero carbon electric way to get around the city, as well as potential to expand that network. And so these will be replaced in phases. There's kind of different stage gates of acquisition of these streetcars. But we look forward to seeing these rolling on the rails in the near future of the coming years. The second strategic program is around active transportation maintenance operations. This is focused primarily on both equipment as well as the maintenance and staff associated with cleaning bike lanes or cleaning active transportation related facilities. And what you see in the lower left photo there is a photo that I actually took a couple weeks ago on the Greeley Avenue bike path of the new electric bike lane sweeper in action. And so this is currently on lease to the city. And then there'll be an acquisition plan for purchasing 2 of these vehicles over really the next year and a half or so, with the commitment to sweep bike lanes 6 times per year, especially when the accumulation of leaves or debris is most. And so it's really exciting to see some of these programs already in action. Another allocation of $20 million is for what's called the Small Active Transportation Capital Program. And so this is for both bike infrastructure and making upgrades to bike lanes, making safe crossings for pedestrians, signalization improvements, and being able to do both what are called kind of quick build projects throughout the city to address specific needs, as well as some investments in key area plans, particularly in East Portland and Northeast Portland. And so these are opportunities that really help make walking, biking, or rolling around the city safer, and are in direct response, I'd note, also to community needs that we heard during the Climate Investment Plan. When we were putting together the Climate Investment Plan, we heard a lot of desire or need for pedestrian improvements in particular, and being able to make changes or safety modifications to our streets to make it easier and better for people to get around. And so this is an allocation that helps respond to that need and also do some really good work in the community. Connected to this is the Strategic Program 31, focused on the programming, education, and encouragement elements of PBOT's work out in the community, including things like bike safety education, things like Sunday parkways, which we funded the first Sunday parkways at the end of, I believe it was August. There was one that was PCEF funded. And then there'll be an expansion of Sunday parkways over the coming years to do more events per year, because that was budget constrained previously. And so this is a place where I think we really should be proud and be able to take credit for a lot of the great community engagement that PBOT is going to be doing through PCEF funding out there. Additionally, there's a $37 million allocation for LED street lighting, both increasing the amount of streetlights that are available, especially in high crash corridors. PBOT has identified areas where there's really underlit parts of the city that is both a direct public safety as well as a road hazard for people, and being able to provide better quality of light, as well as all of these light fixtures are being designed or optimized to avoid light pollution. And then there's some retrofit of the existing kind of last bundle of lighting within the city that is still the more inefficient high pressure sodium lighting and upgrading that to LEDs. And so collectively, as we saw in that larger chart, there's a significant allocation going to Portland Bureau of Transportation in these different programs that are in some ways connected, but all do have direct climate benefits. And many of them have direct safety or community benefits as well. Then another large allocation is, and the last one I'll discuss here, because we're almost at the end of this, is around Portland Parks and Recreation. And there's a few different pieces of this. One is Strategic Program 24, which is really focused on the maintenance and existing commitments. And initially were coming through Bureau of Environmental Services. But then in this new form of government, we're transferred over to the Portland Parks Urban Forestry Division for the continued maintenance of trees and shrubs within the city. There's also some critical upgrades and resiliency improvements being made to Mount Scott Community Center as part of a larger project, but being able to make improvements that increase the energy efficiency of the HVAC system, increasing lighting and efficiency as well as windows, putting in solar and likely energy storage as well as a resiliency measure, and then improving some key elements of both ADA accessibility as well as seismic upgrades, again within the allowed percentages or structures that we have within PCEF. The largest allocation in the entire CIP amendment is something that was also called for, and we heard loud and clear when we were going through the climate investment plan process, which is the need for street tree care and for people to be able to have both that cost burden relieved as well as the worry relieved of taking care of street trees within the city. And so this is an allocation, and I'll talk a little bit more about how some of it has shifted, that is really launching the pilot of this longer term program, being able to have a street tree maintenance program where the city can coordinate the pruning, disease treatment if needed, and if needed, if a tree is at the end of its life, also being able to remove it and replace that tree. And so this is an approach to being able to do this citywide eventually through ramping this up over the next 5 years. There's also an arborist trainee program that is open right now. If you know people that are interested in becoming arborists, there is a recruitment that is happening right now for a cohort of 3 people who would be trained over a 2-year period to come into urban forestry to learn the skills that it takes to become an arborist, and to get the certifications necessary to do that work. And so again, kind of like Bebop, there's some of these projects within Portland Parks and Recreation that are up and running, and we're really excited to see them grow. In addition, the last allocation here is a transition of the equipment that Portland Parks uses throughout its parks and in maintaining all of the facilities where they currently have both backpack leaf blowers as well as handheld leaf blowers. And there's a lot of products already on the market for electric handheld leaf blowers, but this is a transition of all of their fleet of the electric backpack leaf blower, or the backpack leaf blowers, transitioning those to electric, as well as purchasing the additional batteries and chargers needed to be able to maintain that fleet of equipment, and looking also for additional opportunities to change over different types of equipment and electrify landscaping more broadly, and recognizing that there's a need in some facilities that don't have adequate electrical service to make changes to the building so that they can have a network of charging and battery charging set up there. So that is the very brief high-level overview of all of these allocations. And I wanted to just dive in a little bit to some pieces that were changed from when we initially brought this to you, and what was approved in February, and some kind of administrative changes as well as budget changes that were made in the process. And so The first I'll speak to is really, when we worked with the bureaus and scoping this out and starting to build out these programs, there's efficiency to management within some of these where we merged where we merged multiple programs into one. And so the first was in Bureau of Environmental Services. There were originally kind of two different elements of funding, one on natural areas, one on the green infrastructure, maintenance and construction. And the reality is that there's some staff that really work on both of those pieces together. And so it made sense to bring them together into a single program, even though there's multiple different sub-programs that we'll be tracking in terms of metrics and outcomes throughout that. Within Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, there were initially 4 different strategic programs focused on transportation, building decarbonization, different elements of policy, as well as tracking the carbon inventory. And really those are a single team or single set of roles that we brought together for administration within the Bureau here into one $2.8 million allocation. In Portland Parks and Recreation, I just kind of mentioned this program, but that arborist trainee program was initially a standalone $840,000 program over 5 years. And because it's really connected to the work out on the parks and the development of that street tree care program over time, those roles really are best fit under a single management of a strategic program. And so that program was kind of brought up to the 100,840,000 level. The second set of changes were really the ones that were made through the city budget process through the fall or through the spring. I'm sorry. And those were some reallocations or sub-allocations that were made, as well as a couple areas where additional funding was added to existing strategic programs that we'd scoped out. The first that I'll address is Strategic Program 25, focused initially on only multifamily properties. And there was that $500,000 sub-allocation that's for the residential low-income home repair grant program. And so that program is active right now and is continuing to serve community needs, but would not have been funded were it not for PCEF. The total allocation there didn't change. It was $40 million. Within Bureau of Fleet Facilities, there were some pieces that were added here. There was $3 million added to Portland Police Bureau fleet vehicles and replacing those vehicles and developing a pathway for more electric patrol vehicles at the full replacement costs associated with that. Additionally, there was $1.17 million added for the cost related to the move to and the lease associated with the move to this new Swan Island Fleet Maintenance Facility in that future vision of a facility that's focused primarily on serving the needs of an increasingly electrified fleet in the city. So that did change the total allocation there from a $25 million allocation to a $29.17 million allocation. The last piece that was modified or changed within the city budget process and the mayor's budget was Strategic Program 34. Initially was a $100 million allocation exclusively to that ramp up of the street tree care program. And there was $35 million of that reallocated for the existing budget needs of tree care within the city more broadly, including arborists, tree inspectors, staff that are related to serving permitting or regulatory needs that are still caring for trees and still doing that great work in our parks and public spaces. And so in total, coming back to this slide, this is a significant funding of allocation to different city bureaus, and we're working to formalize and implement this. The next step is doing the climate investment plan amendment and going to the city council with that. And then as part of that, we're also, and I'll talk about this in a moment, formalizing program scope agreements with each bureau and developing the reporting and structure for management of these with a small but growing team. We are really excited to work with all our partners at the bureaus, and there's a lot of great work collectively here in this over $386 million of allocation in the next 5 years. And there's some great climate work that the city will be implementing. I also wanted to just highlight a couple other pieces that we're bringing to City Council. So the one major change is that because of those modifications I mentioned, the total amount allocated did move up from 382,815,000 to that 386,986,000. And then we are going to recommend to City Council that we expand the Cooling Portland program. We're really excited by all the work that our community distribution partners and our equipment purchasing partner, Earth Advantage, have done in this program. And there has been a clear need that is significantly higher than we estimated. And so when we went into the Cooling Portland program about 3 years ago, we set an initial target of 15,000 units over 5 years. We just sort of wrapped up year 3. There are still a few installations happening, but I took a screenshot, which you'll see on the right there just about a day ago. And there's over 13,000 units installed, providing people with cooling as well as supplemental heating throughout the community. This year, we also launched a program with 311 to be able to be a central intake for people who needed access, for low-income Portlanders who needed access to cooling. And we had a significant number of requests. Even in the first 2 days, we had over a couple thousand requests come in. And so we've been working to distribute those and allocate them to community partners. But we currently are in a situation where we don't have enough resources to meet the full need that we understand is already there. And we want to be able to continue expanding the program. So we will be recommending to City Council to increase the funding for Cooling Portland to be able to serve a greater number of people. Exact number yet to be determined. Just want to speak to kind of what our expectations are and the next steps before I hand it back for questions and being able to really have a little bit of discussion here. And just want you as a committee and the public to know that we have a lot of the same expectations that we do of grantees in our connection and work with bureaus. We're expecting quarterly reports on the funding that they're expending, the progress towards their goals, their work on contracts or work that is going out, as well as metrics. Additionally, we're planning to have an annual summary of outcomes, as well as a 2-year review opportunity based on the feedback that you all provided when you approved this process. Also, we'll be setting expectations and regular check-ins for communications and media opportunities to be able to tell that story of how PCEF is making a difference in the community, how we're connecting different parts of the city together to work to meet community needs and provide for public services, and really being able to also, frankly, get some credit for that. And so as we build up both our community outreach team and communications team, we'll have more of the resources to build that together in conjunction with our partners at other bureaus. Also, and Jess is a big piece of this and really wonderful to have him on board. We're finalizing and working to push through the workforce and contractor equity related commitments and expectations that apply to all projects. And so we will work with all bureaus to make sure that they're complying with the PCEF wage requirements and all of the terms and conditions that are associated with PCEF funding. There'll be an initial transition period, recognizing that there is contracted work in progress, but then requirements for all new contracts to include those terms and conditions and reporting over time on those as well. So this is a brief overview, and there's a lot more content in that about 60-page document that you received. But the next part is really just a discussion of these questions as well as other questions that you might have. Maybe I'll pass it back to Sam or Tracy for facilitation here.
Sam, did you have comments to add?
No, just big kudos to James and now Johnny and Rachel in coordinating with all the bureaus and getting all this information. As you all know, this sort of was unexpected in terms of how this came into our laps in terms of this work. So it's an additional body of work, and they've done a great job in getting all this information and working to bring clarity to all our bureau colleagues around the work that they're doing and how we get that greater alignment with the work that we want to see. So just big kudos to them, but I think it's really just these questions to you, Tracy.
All right, committee members, questions or comments at this point? Meg.
I guess my role is official icebreaker usually with the first question off the bat. Thanks, James, for all this update. I know we've been eager to hear how things are rolling. And I have a couple comments. They vary widely. One is just for question one, proposed outcomes and goals. On the FERC specific one with the Water Bureau, I remember Paul particularly leading with a conversation about impact to salmon, and I don't see that anywhere in the goals or outcomes related for that program. So I hope we can add that. There is attention to consultation with tribal communities, but nothing about salmon. And I remember that being a committee raised that as one issue.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And yeah, we can add that piece because there is an existing habitat conservation plan related to salmon impacts, and the Portland Water Bureau or Bureau of Hydroelectric Power is very keenly aware of both the regulatory elements as well as the biological science elements. And there is a reality where the operation of the hydroelectric facility does actually provide a little bit more flexibility in meeting the habitat needs rather than just spilling water over the dam. And so we can make sure that we incorporate that into the climate investment plan narrative a little bit better. Yeah, thanks for flagging that.
Yeah, and then kind of a higher level, so this is not specific to one particular strategic program. Well, I guess it is kind of, but just noting, and for committee that have been tracking or are newer to all this, there's been an evolution of our committee's role and authority in all of this. And so I'm just noticing that we, under great pressure, went forward and made a recommendation to council to amend the CIP to include 300 and some odd million. That did not include money for the Police Bureau EV, I don't think, but council went back and added that in. We weren't even aware of that. I wasn't aware of that until pretty much the last few weeks. And I think that is just because that is, I would love you all to comment on. I think that's just how it works. Like we're not consulted and we don't have to approve those sorts of, but in the end, that's not an insignificant amount of money. Like nonprofit orgs don't get those grants when they apply to them. We have some that didn't get $5 million or $1 million grants, but that was added in without any engagement on our part, to my knowledge. So that's just kind of one comment, but it also makes me wonder about the future of PCEF and who, when these amendments are made, who ultimately gets to decide. And I think it's council, but I would love for you just to comment on that. And then kind of, James, your last point too, I'm a big fan of Cooling Portland. I was one of the first committee members that were behind it, but kind of we don't have a role, I think, in being consulted about the expansion of funding for that. That's just sort of assumed. I guess I would just love kind of commenting on all this because it seems like some of it's moving beyond our attention or ability to weigh in.
So yeah, I'll speak to Megan, just the first part, and I think you're correct. You all made your recommendation, and it was through the budget process that that additional $3 million got added in there among some of the other changes. And so what we're going to be working on is how do we capture that and make sure that we're similarly, as we bring the CIP forward, you all have what you recommended. We've got now more clarity and details in that programming, but then there are things in there that are coming in that weren't what you all recommended. And so we want to make sure we capture that and note that these are additional changes that council made as part of their budget process. And so that's sort of our role, is to capture that change. I to the best extent we can, we'll try to capture the why behind that change. Obviously, that came through the budget process, which we really only enter in at one part of it, and then it really moves on beyond us. And so, our objective in that is to make sure folks are clear what happened, and that that there's an understanding of ultimately where those resources are going to flow. In terms of the Cooling Portland, a big part of that is we're sort of, it's in this little bit of a gray, I don't want to say no man's land, but it's part of that pre-CIP world, in that it doesn't exist anywhere. And yet there's a whole host of whether it's either canceled grants or adjustments. So the resources have been there pre-CIP. And what we're largely trying to do is right size this, because we have our equipment purchasing partner contracted with us for 5 years. The way we budgeted this, we have them, they're there set for 5 years of administration. but we essentially ran out of our equipment budget in our installation budget. And so we're trying to right size those, but we aren't looking at expanding the program beyond that 5 years we committed to. So that just want to, that's the, I think in some ways the distinction is trying to capture that original commitment towards running the program for 5 years. The goal is an adjustment because we've overperformed, but it's a good point. And I think it's one of those that it is, I hope that there's will be less of those that are in that weird place of all the action things that happened before the CIP. But this is our attempt to bring that in front of you all now.
And maybe a quick clarification, just for the record, it's not that we've run out of funding yet in meeting that. It's actually that we would run out of funding next year ahead of time. And so we're, I guess, preempting that by being able to expand the program goals and funding to be able to meet 5 years worth of that community need, recognizing the great work that partners have done and being able to ramp up much faster than we initially thought. So, yeah. See, Tracy.
Like I said, I'm very supportive of Clean Portland. I'm more just raising questions about process, and that this is a little bit of a weird one. So I think if we can bring it into the right process. My last comment, and then I hope to hear from lots of committee members, especially on workforce, because it's not my specialty area, but just a question as we look to 2026 and planning the next CIP, et cetera. You mentioned long-term programming. I mean, one thing the committee brought up, as did Bureau reps when they spoke to us, is we weren't sure about the idea of PCEF becoming the long-term funding source for these programs. It seems like there's an implication here that that is what's being expected in the question, or maybe I'm reading into it. And I just, you know, it was a concern we raised as a committee, was that wasn't our intent of PCEF funding, was to become a long-term funding source for city programs. And many city programs weren't that enthused about that idea either, because, well, or I shouldn't speak for them, but anyway, that wasn't our intent on the committee. So I'm just curious if you can speak to that as we think about answering number 2.
Yeah, I think, Megan, what I'll do, you know, there's an unknown that we don't know what the next city council doing. There is obviously across the city, there is just systematic funding issues across more than one bureau. Some of which you all are well aware of, you know, around our transportation funding and whatnot. And so I think there's obviously that work that needs to happen that I hope folks are engaged in, that I expect the next city council to be engaged in, to ask those questions. But barring that, I think we are in this position where we are funding several pretty significant programs to the city that are critical for our climate work. And so I think there's a couple ways you can approach it, but one certainly is we sort of, you know, we got into a bit of a shotgun marriage with their bureau colleagues, and we're working through that and making good work of that, and we're excited to do that. But there's also just another scenario here where what would it have looked like if we had actually a good lead time, you know, 9 months, 10 months to work through this and figure out how do we design these programs really in PCEF's vision, recognize, you know. So I think that there's an unknown there, and I think we want at least knowing that at least we're here now, and that until that funding scenario is figured out, we're going to probably be in a challenging situation. And how do we figure out what would have been an ideal had we been able to really thoughtfully take a good chunk of time to plan out the programming. So I'm not saying that it's a given, but I think it's worthwhile to be thinking about that future state and what are the things we could do in this interim while we're learning a good bit, getting good outcomes, good reporting on this. How do we think about some of this more?
Tracy.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell James, thank you so much for doing this overview of the city programs that, you know, purportedly will bring great benefits to Portlanders. I did have a question though about SP 27, the cooling tower. I think I heard you say that the project had already been completed and it's about $1 million. So is that $1 million just to replenish that budget since that project has already been installed?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And that's a good question. You know, in some ways, I'd say yes. You know, the project is, to my understanding, largely complete and was needed to be done a few months ago in order to get Arlene Schnitzer concert venue back up and operational. They had kind of a temporary approach. There was some big equipment parked on the side of the road for a while. And so, you know, like many things I think in in the city budget, there was some funding that was used to pay for those costs immediately, but now there is both the kind of completion of that, and we got back some information about the exact costs and workforce, and that project is, I guess, moving over the funding to pay for that work that happened.
And so I just wanted to know, are we going to be considering more projects that are shovel complete as opposed to just shovel ready going forward?
This is a tricky one because it was sort of in process where it wasn't completed previous to it is now complete. Yeah, but it was kind of the need was identified when this funding was being allocated in February, and then there was a few months of kind of this temporary emergency operation of the facility with this very inefficient equipment.
Yeah.
And then the work happened like a couple months ago. So yeah.
Okay.
Sam, I don't know if you want to jump in more with nuance there, but
it's this was one of those places where we're catching up to the work that we did after the fact. But largely, yeah, when the project hadn't been underway when the recommendation was made, but since now that we're now coming back to you all, 8 months later, it's now since been completed.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Robin?
Yeah, thanks for this overview. I just many of my comments were similar to what Meg had shared, and so I'm not going to reiterate that. I just want to say that we are where we are because we were put in this situation where we had to be responsive, make decisions quickly, and never really had control of the process. And that has resulted in some limited transparency. Just an example, that we discussed here. It resulted in this potential for PCEF being a long-term funding source for some certain programs, which I think we're all very wary about. And it just put us in a very reactive mode. And you had a slide earlier, I think on slide number 11, where you showed the gap, right? That gap is gonna change over time. And I guess to answer your question number 2 is that it would be better, I think, to do what we need to do to control the narrative, make recommendations on how we're going to approach increased or decreased funding, and not be in this position where we're just responding and reacting to the council and the timelines of the council and whatnot. So I really hope we can be more proactive and kind of take this time that we might have right now. I don't know how long we'll have this time, how long this window will last, but just be really proactive in terms of figuring out what do we do next time something like this happens, so that we can be more intentional, and I think better make funding recommendations that are more rooted to the original intent of PCEF.
Ranfees?
I just want to echo comments from folks in the committee that spoke so far. I think I think it'd be important in the future we just balance other needs and interests, both within city government but also with the broader city. I will just say, again, want to be great to make sure that the amendments that were made to the committee's original recommendation to council be in written format and published on the website as per code. I think that's really important. And I think the city council just owes to provide that sort of written detail for the amendments. So I think that's just important, just to be compliant with PCEF code. It would be helpful as we were kind of discussing the updates, just be useful to know what are the projected money received back from potential direct pay provisions. So I think we've discussed this in the past, like some of the clean energy investments that we are providing, the city of Portland is able to, through the Inflation Reduction Act, receive direct pay money back. So up to 30%. So it would be good to know as a sort of a barometer performance metric, how much money the city of Portland will receive back from the IRS on this. We've discussed additionally some projected savings for ratepayers on some of the projects, both for, I think, Water Bureau, BES, and maybe on the electrical side, but just be good to just get some potential projected savings there if those are quantifiable, or some assumptions that we would be basing that on. And then I think I have just maybe just an additional question that I don't expect to be answered now, but what would occur where there are potential project delays? There are some projects here that have been discussed that seem like they're highly likely to have potential project delays for a variety of different factors. So I think the vehicle fleet electrification, those are, I think you've both highlighted some things that would occur within the city, both leasing, also like the purchasing of material of those vehicles, as well as training. There are, I think, just inherent potential delays built in there. But then it seems like in addition to some of the capital improvement projects, we would need potential transmission and substation upgrades. So those could be their own delays there. So I think it would be good to know in the future, like in the event of project delays there, how would the committee be updated? How would the city approach that? Especially if they go outside of the 5-year window. So I think that's just a good level of transparency, that an update of how we would address potential scenarios. And of course, I'm just picking on one item there. There might be other ones. I think the FERC permitting for the hydro facility could be another area. It seems like it's subject to tribal consultation, so I think that might take more time. Again, I'm not assuming anything out of there, but those are just things that have historically could lead to project delays. I do want to say, just provide some commentary here on just like, I think just to add to the, I think, current feeling around the current, process, and then I'll just maybe answer some of these questions. I'd say I think it was a big shift to make the changes that we needed because of the budget needs of the city. And I think it's really important that we balance the interest of community as we make this investment in the city. And I hope council and the mayor's office hears this and adheres to this. But one, I think very paramount important is city employees and its collective bargaining agreement. I think it's really important, if we were making this investment to protect and save jobs, that I think council and the mayor's office is really prioritizing ensuring that city staff continues with the collective bargaining agreement. So I know that's currently subject for negotiation, but I just want to note from a Valley perspective, from a justice framework that we have within PCEF principles, I hope that's adhered to, especially workforce equity. I think we want to ensure, like, hey, there are jobs that have historically been barriers for the broader public into city jobs. Like, I hope the city really develops and thinks about creating and opening doors and opening opportunities for workers in city jobs, period. So I think I hope we revisit this question around workforce and contractor development. But that means that people who should be at the table for developing these strategies should include labor, should include community organizations, especially those representing historically impacted communities, and it should include employers. So I think that's just really important and paramount. It's difficult to design and integrate workforce and contractor development without those stakeholders at the table. And I think we just need to balance for those who might be classified as trainees. I think the values of PCEF we captured in code are things like a family wage job, but I think we know that it's not just wages that are important. It's making sure that families are or workers or trainees are receiving family health care and family retirement. So, those are things that are very much important. Some of those are baked into how prevailing wage is calculated. But I think those are gray areas for PCEF and the code, and I think missed opportunities and past code changes to ensure that family health and retirement are part of what we think about as a family wage job. But that's, again, I'll get off my soapbox on just the importance of balancing city as a government entity and balancing the needs of workers and the broader public in this process. Like, I think we can have its own meeting on this, but I do want to say, if we're going to develop proposed goals and outcomes that need to be included in the programmatic agreements, we need community groups, we need labor, both entities within the city, but also external labor partners and employers be part of developing some of those goals and outcomes. And again, if we're going to just develop and design strategies and processes to better integrate, workforce and contract development, we need to see it as marrying both demand side strategy, so that's the employers and how they're hiring, as well as supply side strategies like the training programs and how they're training workers. We've, I think, historically kept them separate, and I think the next iteration for PCEF needs to really think about itself as a market shaper, and that we really need demand side and supply side strategies to really work in concert together. Otherwise, what happens is you have a bunch of people trained, but not a bunch of people being hired. And the last thing we want is create a bunch of hiring goals and a bunch of these employers coming to you all and saying, they're not there. They don't exist. We can't meet these goals. And I think we know we can do better. And so I think that's, again, maybe it's the High Road Advisory Committee, but I think we've discussed this in the past, like PCEF can be a market shaper. It requires proactive planning, which need those demand side strategies, supply side strategies to work in concert together, not separately. Sorry, there's a lot of questions on slide 1 and 2, but yeah, I appreciate, I think, PCEF team sort of giving this update. I know there's a lot and a million things to work on to improve the program. But I think, again, we would be remiss not to highlight areas that I think we can and should work on. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ramfis, for those reflections and insights and recommendation. And yeah, there's a lot there. I did want to note on 2 kind of specific questions you had related to direct pay and accounting for that or being able to report on that. I do think that is something we can do for sure. And then on the quantification of the impact on rate reductions, we'll talk to those infrastructure bureaus and see what type of analysis can be done there. I imagine it will be a little challenging to come up with direct attribution. But we can work on that as well. And then, yeah, really appreciate your recommendations on workforce and integrating those 2 pieces. And yeah, I don't know, Sam, if you want to add more there. I see Megan also has her hand up. But
I will just say, I think we can actually articulately speak to some of the rate reductions in some instances, just because we know that they would have had rate impacts had the bureaus been able to hold on to that programming. So we should be able to speak to that in some sense.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll just say one of the biggest, I think, critiques I think folks would have right now in terms of, I think, how we're benefiting or providing benefits to like impacted communities. I think folks are going to point to some things like, hey, they see big investment on things like streetcar, which I think folks will say, yeah, historically that's only risen the price for property values in downtown. But I think being able to articulate, hey, here are some real potential benefits, even if they're just projections, I think is helpful, I think, to both tell the story of how we're balancing those needs. But I think it's helpful for us to continue to be advocating to say, hey, we need strategies and funding that balances, again, the needs and interests of the city here at large.
Meg?
Yeah, I was looking to see if Faith or any other committee member that hadn't spoken to, but I don't see their hand up. So I will take advantage of answering a few or addressing a little bit more of this conversation you posed, since my first comments were not like necessarily specific to that. And I am going to email James and Sam you a few responses to the large document, because I appreciate all the effort on goals and measures here. And just like wearing my PCEF hat, I would love a little more kind of consistency across them and how they both get like measurable, but also how they bring attention to PCEF, the benefits to PCEF priority communities. It seems like some have outcomes and measures explicit about that and others don't. It would be nice to bring a little bit of similarity where feasible, and definitely I would just like to see that addressed by any and all program. Arguably they all should have benefits, but some are clear about that. So that's one. And then another, I think sometimes in here I see the word resilience used a lot, and often without much definition to it. So I think as a program, kind of asking for providing more clarity about what we mean by that and distinguishing that from greenhouse gas emissions, which are important, but those are sort of two different strategies. So I have some ideas on goals and objectives, but I can share that mainly over email. And for today, I think your question too, I have some idea about collaborating with the bureaus. I mean, I see many bureau reps on the call today, but we're not, getting to hear from them directly. So I hope in the coming years, as we move to learn more in the next CIP, we have some opportunities for discussion, sort of like we did in the funding decision cycle, but not with that level of pressure, but more like actual dialogue among committee and bureaus about what their most climate impactful programs are. And, I think that, so I guess my answer to number one is like structured conversations in a scheduled timeline that isn't about an urgent funding decision, but is more strategic. So that's kind of one answer. About the community leadership, I think we're learning things from the climate, the collaborative funding cycle we have out right now about how we could do better matchmaking between community and city agencies. And I wonder if there's a role for us to play, and us PCEF broadly, like helping connect bureaus to community members and to community org priorities. So maybe there's some sort of matchmaking event or process we can think about to reach number two, particularly the part on community leadership in future projects and programs, so that that's a deeper priority in any city bureau funding in the next round. And then, wearing my hat of regenerative ag cheerleader on this committee, I can't help but say that wasn't funded at all in this round. And I sure hope that it's not overlooked in the next round of bureau funding, if that's indeed the direction we continue to go.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Megan. I think I can say probably with high confidence that our colleagues, our bureau colleagues that are in this call and that have worked with our team on this have a lot of probably would actually very much desire to connect with you all and talk through some of their programming. I think it's a question of how do we structure that. But I think that there'd be a lot of desire to do that and it's really what we hope to get now is, it'll take us just the way these cycles go. It'll be about the next December before we really get the first first bucket of data and information back on these projects, where we'll have had a full fiscal year, a full year under our belts, and that'll align with a lot of the reporting that we do for the existing sort of budget process. And it'd be helpful to probably take some of that information that again it's usually a requirement of our city budget process to have those performance measures around that time frame. But taking that sort of information and using that, not a roadshow per se, but using that and bringing bureaus in front of you all in a sequence of meetings after that to talk through some of those outcomes and use that as a basis to share how things are going, provide more narrative, but also talk through some of those initial numbers. So I think there's a way we can think about that, and that can start help, just seed the ground for what could come next, just in understanding what they've done here so far. And then just I think that piece on there's a good bit of just tightening, and I think we'll certainly take those lessons down in terms of that feedback around how do we bring more consistency around how we talk about the benefits. But we'll certainly go back and look through that.
Yeah, and thank you, Megan, for those comments, and also maybe a reminder, because we would like all comments or suggestions back by the end of the week, by November 1st. So please, if you do have any committee members, if you have written feedback or additional pieces you want to reflect in the CIP narrative, please do send those to us because we need to finalize that document, refine it, and then get it in front of City Council here in a few weeks.
I try to be clear.
Are there any final questions or comments from the committee members? All right, we will conclude. Everyone have a great remainder of the week, and thank you for participating. Oh, Sam, did you have a comment? Oh, all right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.